Welcome to Threads of Truth, where real life mysteries meet internet speculation. And I just have to start by saying, wow, this is our 100th exploration.
It is. It's a pretty significant milestone.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you for being here for it. And for this one, we felt we needed to turn to a case that is, well, it's just one of the most haunting and really enduring mysteries to ever come out of New England.
We're talking about the disappearance and murder of Molly Bish.
Exactly. It's a case that feels so relatable, and because of that, it's just profoundly terrifying.
It happened in such an ordinary place. We were talking about Warren, Massachusetts, a small, quiet town on what should have been a perfectly normal Tuesday morning in the summer of 2000.
And Molly Bish was just 16 years old. She was just starting her summer job as a lifeguard at Comins Pond.
And that's what's so immediately gripping, right? The core paradox of how she vanished.
The window of opportunity. I mean, it's impossibly small.
Barely a window at all. She dropped off, and she was alone at her post for just a matter of minutes. The time it takes to, set down your bag and maybe unlock a gate.
And yet, when investigators showed up later, the scene they found, it just screamed that something catastrophic had happened.
Yeah, her belongings were all there. Her whistle, her shoes, this new two-way police radio she was meant to have for safety.
Her first aid kit, even her lunch.
All of it. Just left right there, untouched and neatly arranged at her station.
And that one detail, the undisturbed nature of her things, it's just so central to the whole story, isn't it? It implies something so sudden, so overwhelming.
It wasn't a gradual thing. It wasn't her walking off. It was a snatch. Something that just ripped the piece of that summer morning apart and left behind a cold case that nearly 25 years later still doesn't have a complete answer.
And that's the challenge we're going to examine today. We're going to unpack this whole sequence of events.
We'll start with the clues that came even before the crime. We'll walk through the critical sightings of a suspicious man in a white car, trace the agony of those missing years, and follow the investigation right up to the people they've recently named as persons of interest.
Okay, so to really understand the gravity of that morning, June 27th, 2000, we need to set the scene. Molly was a high school sophomore, and from all accounts, she was really excited about this summer job.
It was a step up,
Yep.
A new level of responsibility, of independence.
And Comins Pond. It's a pretty place, but it's small. It's relatively secluded, especially early in the morning before people start showing up.
Which makes that lifeguard post inherently vulnerable. And that vulnerability seems to be exactly what attracted the perpetrator.
So to find the first real clue, we actually have to go back 24 hours to June 26th.
Right. Molly's mother, Molly Bish, she dropped Molly off at the pond for what was, we think, her first or second day on the job. And that's when she noticed something that would become the central, enduring, and just frustrating piece of evidence in this whole case.
So tell us about the sighting. What did she see? What made it stick in her memory so vividly?
Magi noticed a man. She described him as stocky, with a prominent mustache, maybe wearing glasses, and he was just sitting alone in a white sedan.
Okay, a white sedan? That's pretty generic.
It is, but it was where he was parked and what he was doing. The car was very near the lot where she was dropping Molly off. And Magi recalls having this immediate intuitive flicker of unease, a gut reaction that something about his presence just felt wrong.
Like he was watching.
Exactly, like he was observing the location with an intensity that just felt out of place for someone casually visiting a quiet pond in the morning.
Wow. That's a powerful moment, that flash of maternal instinct that turned out to be so tragically right. But she didn't feel like there was an immediate danger.
No, and you can understand why. You'd categorize it as, just a bit suspicious. A strange local guy sitting in his car. She didn't sense an imminent threat to Molly, so she drove off.
But in hindsight,
it looks like something much more sinister. A scoping out of the location, maybe even a dry run. It just immediately shifts the whole narrative away from a crime of random chance and toward preparation.
okay, so that establishes this idea of premeditation, or at least scouting, 24 hours before. So let's move to the morning it happened, June 27th.
That morning, Magi drops Molly off again, right around 9:45 a.m. She drives away, and she later said she did not see the man or the white car this time.
Okay.
But this is where the timeline gets terrifyingly tight. Another witness comes forward later and confirms the pattern. This person claims they did see a man fitting that exact same description, stocky, mustache in the parking lot, just minutes before Molly was supposed to have arrived.
So the man from the day before was there again. He was either waiting for Molly specifically or just waiting for that window of vulnerability when the lifeguard arrived alone.
It suggests the perpetrator was likely already there, already in position, when Molly pulled up. And that efficiency could explain why the abduction was successful without any obvious signs of a struggle.
So hours go by. What happens next?
It's not until around 11 a.m. when the first swimmers arrive that anyone realizes something is wrong.
Yeah.
They see the empty chair, no lifeguard on duty, and they report it to the authorities.
And that's when the panic starts.
Yes. The police contact the Bish family, and when they get to the scene, that discovery of her things, the empty post, the neat arrangement of her shoes, her whistle, her radio, it just confirmed their worst fear.
It's like she was taken right as she was setting up.
Or maybe even before she could fully set up. You know, the psychology of those neatly arranged items is it's so disturbing. It suggests either she was deceived or there was just extreme control used to subdue her so quickly. Maybe someone approached her pretending to be a park official or something like that.
And the response from law enforcement and the community must have been immediate.
Oh, it was immense. The disappearance of Molly Bish triggered what became, at the time, the most extensive and expensive search for a missing person in Massachusetts history. Yeah. Helicopters, search teams with bloodhounds, hundreds of volunteers. The whole community just poured out, fueled by the heartbreak of this young girl being taken from her summer job.
But despite that huge concentrated effort, there was nothing. A 3-year gap where the investigation just hit a wall.
It was devastating for everyone. The intense search yielded absolutely nothing. No witnesses to the actual abduction, no useful trace evidence, no vehicle details beyond that very general white sedan description.
And the case just went cold.
It did. The pressure on investigators was immense, and you can't even imagine the pain the family was going through. The consensus was always that the person who did this had to be local, someone who knew how to disappear into the vast winding back roads of rural Massachusetts.
And that assumption, that local knowledge, proved to be critical to the eventual discovery, right?
It was. The turning point came really unexpectedly in the fall of 2002. A hunter was out walking in a remote, heavily wooded area.
Where was this?
An area called Whiskey Hill in the town of Palmer. It's about 5 miles or 8 kilometers away from Comins Pond. And this hunter, he noticed a piece of blue fabric snagged on something.
Just a piece of fabric.
Right. But the color, it was a distinctive blue, and it was similar to the swimsuit Molly was wearing when she vanished. The hunter later made the connection and reported it.
5 miles away. That's close enough to be connected, but far enough that the killer would have had to know these obscure routes.
Exactly. Whiskey Hill is desolate. It's remote terrain, mainly used by hunters or loggers. It's not a place you just stumble upon. So after that clue was reported, another massive search was organized in that area. And on June 9th, 2003, they finally found Molly's remains.
Which provided that tragic confirmation and officially turned this into a murder investigation.
Yes.
But with 3 years of exposure to the elements, I imagine the forensic challenges were just immense.
This is where it gets really difficult for investigators, isn't it? It's the single greatest barrier to getting definitive closure in this case. After that much time, you're dealing with extensive decomposition, weather exposure. The science term is taphonomy. And because of that, investigators couldn't establish a precise cause of death.
So they couldn't determine if there was blunt force trauma or
strangulation or any other kind of fatal injury. The evidence simply didn't survive.
So with no physical cause of death, the case is forced to rely almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, behavioral links.
Precisely. That crucial limiting factor meant they had to focus on establishing clear geographical and behavioral connections between their suspects and the two key locations, Comins Pond, where she was taken, and Whiskey Hill, where she was found.
So they classify it as a homicide, but the how is a mystery, which forces them to focus on the who based on things like motive and proximity.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move to the persons of interest then, because this is really where the investigative strategy has been focused for years.
Right. 3 men, in particular, have been under intense focus because their links to the area and their violent histories. The first is a man named Rodney Stanger.
And what puts Stanger on that list?
Stanger was a local. He lived right there in the vicinity, so he had immediate geographic access. But more critically, Investigators found that he was intimately familiar with both of the key locations.
Comins Pond and Whiskey Hill.
Exactly. He was known to fish all the time at Comins Pond, the abduction site. And he hunted extensively on Whiskey Hill, the exact area where Molly's body was eventually found.
That link to both the scene of the crime and the disposal site, that feels like a prerequisite for the killer, given how remote Whiskey Hill is.
It's the strongest circumstantial anchor you could ask for. On top of that, Stanger reportedly had access to a white car that matched the general description seen by Molly Bish and the other witness.
And what happened to Stanger?
About a year after Molly's murder, he moved to Florida. Now, he was never charged in the Bish case, but he was later convicted down in Florida of murdering his own girlfriend. So that establishes a proven capacity for lethal violence and just reinforces his status as a person of interest. It offers this really disturbing behavioral profile, even if they can't find a direct forensic link to Molly.
Then there's Gerald Battistoni. What's his story?
Battistoni was another known local with a very concerning history. He was a convicted rapist. His criminal record involving sexual offenses went all the way back to 1980.
And investigators saw a resemblance.
They did. They noted his physical appearance was reported to be similar to the composite sketch they created based on Molly Bish's sighting. The stocky build, the general features.
Was there a geographical link for him as well?
Yes. He was also reported to have been in the general area where Molly's body was found. So for investigators, Battistoni was this perfect storm of opportunity, local knowledge, and a history of sexual violence. A very compelling suspect.
And finally, that brings us to the most recent major public development in the case, which concerns Francis Frank P. Sumner Sr.
This was a huge deal. In June of 2021, the district attorney, Joseph Early, he took the pretty unusual step of publicly naming Sumner as a person of interest.
And Sumner's background.
He was a convicted sex offender with a very long criminal record. Fit the behavioral profile of a high-risk offender perfectly.
But the big challenge with Sumner is that he died in 2016. So why name a deceased person of interest 5 years after his death? What led them to him so late in the game?
It strongly suggests that investigators had built a really compelling circumstantial case against him. Maybe something they found in his records, or from new interviews, or evidence that only came to light after he died. So the focus immediately turned to trying to validate that with forensics, specifically through advanced techniques like familial DNA.
Can you just quickly explain for our listeners what familial DNA is and why it was so important here?
Sure. Traditional DNA testing needs a direct match to a sample in a police database. Familial DNA is different. You search those same databases not for an exact match, but for a close biological relative, a son, a brother, a cousin. If you get a partial match to a relative, it can point you toward a deceased suspect like Sumner.
And what was the result of that testing?
In 2022, they did a familial DNA test on Sumner's son. But that specific test did not come back as a match to any DNA evidence they had from the case.
So that clears them.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And this is really critical. That result did not clear Francis Sumner Sr. The investigation into him is still very much active. It suggests that the authorities have other strong links, maybe not DNA-based, that they're still pursuing. They've invested too much to just drop it because one test was negative.
So just to sum up this section, we have a tragedy defined by this incredible efficiency and mystery. We have a timeline. We know she was murdered. We know where it started and where she was found. But the direct evidence, the cause of death, the undeniable forensic link to one person, that's what's missing. And it forces investigators to rely on these POIs with their local ties and violent histories.
Exactly. The facts are what define the mystery. How does a girl vanish in a blink, only to be found 3 years later in this very specific remote spot? The answer is probably somewhere in the lives of those men, and the hope is that new technology can finally close that gap.
When a case with this much emotional weight stays unsolved for so long, the vacuum gets filled. It's inevitable. Speculation just rushes in, especially in online communities that are dedicated to cold cases.
Right. And the public conversation around Molly Bish really revolves around a few key questions. Was this a crime of opportunity, or was this a carefully planned abduction? And who had the knowledge to pull it off?
So the first, and probably the most widely held theory, is the stranger abduction theory. And it focuses everything on the white car man.
This is the strongest theory because it's directly supported by eyewitnesses. You have Molly Bish seeing him the day before, scouting the pond. Then you have another witness seeing him minutes before Molly arrives.
This wasn't a guy just passing through.
No. He was staking out the lifeguard post. He was monitoring its patterns. This puts the perpetrator at the scene with premeditation.
And if he was watching the routine 2 days in a row, that moves it so far beyond just random opportunism. It implies a real intent focused on that specific solitary post.
Right, and that leads you straight into the second major theory, the targeted crime theory. The idea here is that the killer didn't just target a person. They specifically targeted the lifeguard station itself because of its isolation, because of the predictable routine of the guard showing up alone.
It suggests that the crime wasn't a random grab, but a calculated action aimed at that location's weakness. And that idea that it was planned, it makes the scene at the pond with the neatly arranged shoes and everything even more chilling. It means the abduction had to be so fast, so efficient, that she didn't even have time to react or scream.
It points to a perpetrator who is either extremely controlling or who used some kind of deception to get close to her before the attack. Remarkable efficiency and control.
And that brings us to the third theory, which is highly compelling, the local offender familiarity theory.
Right. When you look at where she was found, Whiskey Hill and Palmer, you're talking about a desolate, remote, wooded area. It's full of old logging roads. It's not easy to get to if you don't know it's there.
Someone would have to know those roads, have a reason to be there.
Absolutely. This theory says the offender had to be someone intimately familiar with the local area. A hunter, a trapper, maybe a logger, someone who used those back roads regularly and knew they were obscure and wouldn't be searched right away.
And that brings us right back to the suspects we talked about, like Stanger or Battistoni, who had those known local ties.
It's just highly, highly improbable that an outsider would successfully use that specific remote disposal site without being seen or getting lost. The geographic profile is one of the most powerful tools they have here.
And then, as always happens in these big regional cases, you see the connection theories pop up online.
It's a natural human response, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. People tried to connect Molly's case to other high-profile missing person cases in New England around that time. They're looking for a serial offender.
Do investigators take those seriously?
They always have to consider the possibility, of course. But these online theories often thrive on superficial coincidences. Similar victim demographics or disappearances in the same general state. They rarely have direct forensic evidence linking them. But that human desire to find a bigger, understandable pattern is very powerful.
What's so consistently frustrating here, and what really fuels all this speculation, is that delayed discovery.
That 3-year delay is the fundamental roadblock. For the public, but more importantly, for the prosecution. The condition of the remains just severely limited the usefulness of crucial physical evidence.
We lost the chance for any detailed injury analysis?
Completely. And that critical window to gather trace evidence, hair, fibers, skin cells from the attacker, that was gone. Any DNA that was left was likely highly degraded.
So the fact that we can't say for sure how she died means that the theories about who did it can never be fully proven by forensics alone.
And that forces investigators to lean almost entirely on those more fragile behavioral links and circumstantial evidence to fill that devastating void. And that's the persistent challenge. It feeds the public debate because the definitive truth, it feels like it's just tantalizingly out of reach.
Okay, let's pivot now and try to offer some analysis on this case. Why do you think this story continues to resonate so deeply after all these years? And what are the concrete lessons here?
Well, the resonance comes from the absolute violation of a safe space. A teenager starting her first real job in her own quiet community. But analytically, the whole investigation just keeps circling back to one central piece of evidence: the suspicious man and the white sedan.
We've established it suggests planning, but how reliable can that be when the description, a stocky man with a mustache and a white sedan, is, pretty common? Is it possible too much weight is being placed on that?
That's a really good, critical question. And you're right, white sedans are everywhere. But the reliability here comes not from the car itself, but from the behavior of the man in the car, combined with the timing.
Seen 2 days in a row.
2 days in a row, sitting and observing a solitary post just minutes before the shift starts. That pattern, that suggests not only premeditation, but a focus on the routine of that specific spot. It provides the behavioral context for the crime. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a crime of choice, executed at a very carefully selected moment.
And that behavioral evidence really pushes the needle toward this being a targeted abduction versus an opportunistic one.
It leans heavily toward targeted planning of the location, even if not Molly herself specifically. Opportunistic crimes often leave immediate evidence of a struggle. Things get scattered, there's a visible attempt to flee.
But the scene at Comins Pond was the opposite.
The exact opposite. The neat arrangement of her things suggests she was approached, maybe subdued through a trick or a sudden threat, and then removed quickly before she could even hit the button on her radio. An opportunist might panic. This perpetrator exhibited complete control.
And if the crime was planned, the disposal site had to be known beforehand. This wasn't a panic dump in the woods.
No way. The offender needed local knowledge of the secluded pond and detailed, intimate knowledge of the remote, difficult terrain of Whiskey Hill 5 miles away. This just reinforces the focus on local offenders, like the POIs who were known to be hunting or fishing in those exact areas. That geographic link is really the primary forensic substitute when the physical evidence is so limited.
Let's revisit those investigative challenges. We talked about the lack of a cause of death. What other difficulties did that 3-year exposure in the woods pose for trace evidence?
Well, when a body is left exposed for that long, the environment just destroys what are called transient trace elements. Think of fine hairs, clothing fibers that might have been transferred from the attacker, or minute biological fluids. They're incredibly fragile.
So even if she was held in a car, anything transferred would be gone.
It would degrade very quickly on Whiskey Hill. It forced investigators into a really tough position. They had to rely on historical records, on establishing a suspect's known whereabouts, and meticulously searching for circumstantial links between those two geographic points. And modern tech, like the familial DNA testing they tried with Sumner, that's really a last-ditch effort to pull clarity from these severely degraded, decades-old samples.
You know, despite the unimaginable tragedy and the lack of closure, the Bish family has turned their grief into this incredible advocacy. Molly's legacy is so powerful.
It's a remarkable story of strength. Her parents, John and Maggie Bish, they established the Molly Bish Center for the Protection of Children and the Elderly at Anna Maria College. And that center has become this vital resource for other families of missing persons. It assists law enforcement in cold cases. It's become a hub for child protection. Ensuring Molly's name is always associated with proactive safety.
And beyond the center itself, the case really changed things at an institutional level in Massachusetts, didn't it?
Absolutely. The complexities of that huge but ultimately unsuccessful initial search led to major reforms in legislation and police procedure. Molly's case helped ensure that the search and response protocol for future missing person cases in Massachusetts is far more rapid, organized, and standardized.
It recognized that those first few minutes and hours are everything.
They are absolutely critical. Her tragedy prompted changes that have undoubtedly strengthened emergency response across the state.
Ultimately, the persistence of this case, why it's still one of the state's most emotionally resonant mysteries, it all boils down to that devastating image from the very beginning. A 16-year-old girl, full of life, starting a summer job, just snatched away in a quiet moment, still waiting for complete justice.
And the dedication of the Bish family to getting that justice, even now, 24 years later, is why authorities keep saying they're confident. They believe ongoing forensic advances or new interviews about these persons of interest will eventually lead to an arrest. The thread of truth in this case is still being pulled, and with every year of technological progress, the chance of a resolution gets a little bit better.
Thank you for joining us as we explored this profoundly challenging case. It's a stark reminder of the fragile line between everyday life and tragedy, and the incredible resilience of those who fight for closure. We truly hope that ongoing forensic work will finally bring resolution for the Bish family, who remains so dedicated to finding justice for Molly. That brings us to the close of this examination. Next time on Threads of Truth, we examine the disappearance that left Milton Keynes searching for answers, Leah Croucher and what the 2022 discovery revealed.